This one, by the way, a lady found $35 in a garage sale. And here in America, they're sending it back to Germany because it was in Germany during World War II where they had a house that was set up from Pompeii. It was found originally in Pompeii. The excavations that were there, they took it and set the house up like it was going to look like in Germany when the bombing happened. And the soldiers came in. Some soldier probably took it home with them, and people didn't know what to do with it, so they, and this thing is, but you can see, you can recognize the person here, right?
Father,
Yes, go ahead.
any of them preserved any color? Like you said, all of them are painted?
No, they have some that they can see flecks of paint to know that it is, but also we have the descriptions. We have the descriptions from the surviving primary sources that talked about what they looked like. Yeah, and so yeah. So this is Nerva. All right, this is the hairstyle from the time. But look, see, they've got the eyes in here so that you could see, right? And the bronze they would have painted on the flesh tones. The hair gets even higher on some of the styles here, but you would recognize the lady that's here. I like to say this is the used chariot salesman, and this is the used chariot salesman's wife. Okay. So, but you'd see, you'd be able to recognize that person walking down the street. This is the Veritism from the Greek portraiture. Well, we have something else that's also comes around the same time, and that's at Fayum. We're getting into the Coptic tradition here. Okay. In Egypt, there's an amazing merger between the Coptic, the Egyptian tradition, and remember, the Ptolemies who come and take over are Greek. So you have this merger between some of the Greek Hellenism on top of the Egyptian that was there from before. And they end up developing, and by the way, at Fayum, they discovered a whole cache of these mummies that have these incredibly beautiful funerary portraits. And the realism is there, but we begin to see something that they start doing, and that they alter it just a little bit. So it's not exactly quite realistic. And here's where we see, some people even call these icons before icons. And I'm not saying that once again, remember, the church is created within a time and space, in a culture. A lot of what we do in the worship, a lot of what we do comes from the Jewish tradition, but some things we picked up even from the Roman imperial tradition. All right? There was candles in the temple, there was incense in the temple, but to carry the procession before the emperor, it was done in the Roman tradition. We continue to do it in our processions because Christ is more important than the emperor. If it was good enough for the emperor, we'll do it even more for Christ. So it doesn't mean it's a bad thing if the church chose to take that on and make it as part of it. So same way in terms of even the art. You can see something here. If you look at these people, you can see that you could be able to recognize this person, but there's something that they've started doing with these portraits that exaggerates a little bit. Can you see what the exaggeration is? Can you tell? The eyes. The eyes have it. I mean, some of the, she's got beautiful eyes, but not that big of eyes, okay? All right. Why would they exaggerate the eyes? Life is in the eyes, or, yes, the soul. The fact that communicate, they can't speak. Notice the lips are silent. There's not necessarily a grin. Okay. Yes. Authority. Because if you go back into ancient Egypt, the statues and the artwork that was shown there, they would show also some of the pharaohs with big eyes. By the way, I tried to find some of these older portraits for you. I ran out of time, and it would be too much by the time I loaded up with all of this. But you see that the mouths are still, and the mouths are almost even smaller in some cases, but the eyes are very, very big. Yeah, and focused, yeah. But there's authority, there's power, there's life still, even though it's a funerary portrait. This is amazing. So, I mean, these are really good. Now, this is the hot wax technique. We don't know how they did this. We can't duplicate this. They mix the pigments with hot wax. There's also something called the cold wax technique. In process of doing this preparation for you, I discovered that's like, I never even heard about this before. But this is something where they'll layer it, and I'll show you how important it is. They would layer it and mix the pigments in, and how they would put it is not unlike this. But this is done more on linen. Some of them are done on wooden panels, some of them done on linen. So the linen, they have a little bit more ability to do some of the fine detail. But once again, if you would see these people walking on the street, you would recognize them. Maybe with not that big of eyes, but you recognize them. And there's like 900 portraits that they found. Absolutely incredible. But each person is unique and different. And there's people coming from different races that are there at that time that's here. Okay, and some maybe a little bit idealized. Look at the eyes on that one. Oof. But once again, so that's picked up as a motif. This is one of my favorite ones because this looks like this could be a modern portrait. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? The young man that's here, kind of a little bit of a worry in his eyes that's there. But you can see this layering of this hot wax technique. So guess what? This icon is this technique. It's one of the few surviving what they call encaustic icons. Only, there's maybe a couple of fragments of some of those in the Soviet Union, now Russia, and museums there, but the most of them are St. Catherine's Monastery because these were all destroyed during the iconoclasm period. And we'll talk in a little bit in terms of the reason why they went after them. But you can see in terms of the layering of the wax and the paint, which gives it almost a dimension to it and a warmth and a depth. I don't know if they're intending to. Here's another one here, beautifully done. And this one is, I think, one of the best. I mean, this looks like it could be a modern art, very, very realistic in terms of how they're doing it. So the portraiture, for anyone to say that the period of the time in the Middle East and in Rome, they're not interested in portraiture, that's not true. They're very much interested in it. This is a really also good one done of a woman. Now, that doesn't mean that all these artists who did these funerary portraits were all that great of artists. Some of them were a little bit more caricature. This one kind of, maybe that would have been a cheaper, the person didn't have the money to hire the better artist for this one. This one, I think the eyes got a little bit too big on this one here, right? Like I went overboard, big googly anime eyes, right? And this one kind of looks like beginning Picasso, but that's beside the point. So but most of them are pretty beautiful. This is just incredible. This is incredible. And then just one I want to show you. I could not find this this was because this is in I think this is in this Soviet museum. Yeah, this is all these are all Egyptian funerary portraits. So you can see in terms of where they would get the ability to exaggerate on the eyes and the silence and the stillness of the lips. The person's at peace in the sense. So in the early Christian iconography, there is a concern with realistic portraiture, of capturing the person's actual image. For people to say, we don't know what they look like, and the church didn't care, it doesn't matter, that's not the truth, because Christ was incarnated in time and space. He was born of a woman who was a distinct woman. He had apostles who were distinct people. And we have a continuation of people on the way down that would have known what they looked like, okay? And so there's another form that comes in here, though, with these exaggerated eyes and the smaller lips that are done, we see in these funerary portraits. We also see something that's called a hieratic style. And the Orthodox Church will incorporate this into the iconography to help give an understanding of something I'll show you in a second. This is the obelisk of Theodosius, was set up in 390 AD in the big circus that they had there in Constantinople. This is actually one of the pharaoh's ones that was brought in. You can see the pharaoh Thutmose's obelisk, but what we're concerned about is this base here. It's the base carving here where we see the beginning of what we call this hieratic style. The hieratic style is that we stylistically shift things to show a message behind them. So that if you're going to see something, this is remember, this is in the, it's on the obelisk that's there in the Hippodrome, the big circus there in Constantinople. So they're having the games. They no longer do the blood sports, but they have the chariot games that are going around. And of course, who would this be here that's going to give something? It's the emperor. And what is he going to give? The crown of? Yeah, victory. Bay leaves. Yeah, that's why we throw the bay leaves on Saturday. Okay, Great and Holy Saturday. Okay, so he ends up he's going to give that to the victor that's there. So it's a promise of what's happened. But if you notice what's happening, you see here, these are the soldiers that are here, and here's the rest of the people that are in the stands watching. But if you notice, the emperor is the largest, tallest figure. Why would that be? Because he was a giant, he was a Viking? Was that the reason? Because he's large and in charge, that's right. So they show him as being bigger and larger and more important, okay? And so this is the hieratic style that's developed. You can see this in a little bit more of the context that's here. Here we get to see it even a little bit better. This is on the same obelisk. This is on another side of it, in which you see the emperor and some of the emperor's sons and the co-emperor that's here. And if you notice the rest of his court that's here, the soldiers that are here, and of course here comes the people that are, the dress that they have show that they're actually probably Persian, the Saracens, and they're bringing offerings to the emperor. They're shown as being below, they're showing as being smaller in stature, whereas Theodosius was not that large, okay? But it's the hieratics thing. And we see this going on further in Theodosius in this Missorium, which is a ceremonial plate. And this is one of the best examples that shows him with his two sons that are here. And he's shown he's just hugely large and over-proportioned. And some people will say, well, that's because they were getting closer to the Dark Ages in the West. They didn't know how to do classical art, and so they had lost it. No, it's not true, because down the bottom, this is very classical. They know what the classical motifs are and the styles. They're choosing to do this to show a message, and the message is, this is the man. He's the emperor, all right? He's the authority of God here on earth. These are his heirs that are going to be taken up. This is the military that helps to support them. And this soldier, which helps support him, is, look, he's seated, and he's way, way big. So this kind of monumental depiction out of proportion is part of what we call the hieratic style. Now, when the Renaissance hits, they will throw out a lot of this stuff because they say, what is it with these medieval Christians? They don't know how to paint something in correct proportion. But what I would contend is, and what I was taught, this is not my thesis, this is what a lot of the historians will say, is the early church grabbed a hold of this on purpose, not because they didn't know how to depict things, but they chose this to show, how do you show the divinity of Christ? Well, one way you can show the divinity of Christ is borrowing a motif that's also right here, okay? And if you can see it. And that's the divine halo, in which now he's not, Theodosius, we're not necessarily saying he was a saint when he's depicted this. This is a Roman motif that a lot of their emperors are shown with halos. Why would they show them with the halos? Because in some cases they were considered divine, okay? They were divine, and some of them, remember, they made themselves. Caesar Augustus declared Julius as being the divine Julius. They would declare themselves as successors there. So there was notion, but where did they get this from? This is a motif, and here I failed you. I really failed you, because I tried in my art history books. I didn't have access to my feeble overhead projections, things that I had before, to show you some of them. If you go into Middle Eastern art, some centuries before, you will see some of their deities that they put this halo around. Not necessarily like this, because this is Victus Sol, okay? The Roman sun god that was the invincible sun, and it does show the beams here, but you see also the halo that's there as well too. So in some of these traditions you see here's Antonius Pius, who's shown with having a halo, a part of his imperial power divinity. Not all that many of the pagan deities are shown with that in the West. It's really more of an Eastern type of thing. This comes from a commemorative plate that was found in the West, in which you see the same type of a motif that's there trying to show the divine. Now, so what I'm trying to present to you is the early church, when she is showing the icons or the images of Christ and the saints, trying to be historically accurate, because she has received those, some from Christ, from St. Luke himself, and has copies of those that have been passing down. But at the time when the church is doing the icons, they're also during a Roman period when portraiture is very important, Okay, the real is important, but there's the beginning of the developing of this stylistic form, trying to show the person. How do you show the person as fully human as well as fully divine? That's not an easy thing. And that's the thing that also the Council of Ephesus, they're trying to say we have to show the person as fully human and fully divine. Okay? Okay, so this is the oldest extent. This is the oldest depiction of Christ we have found anywhere so far. Doesn't mean it exists. We can't find something else. Everything else has been destroyed, but this is the oldest thing. It's a piece of graffiti. And it's Alexamenos Graffitio. It's in Palatine Hill. It dates to the 1st century. Some people challenge that it could be later. I'll see if you can see what it is. It's not very favorable. It's showing, if you can see, if you can read the Greek. Yanni, how good you can read the Greek? It's showing Alexamenos worshiping his God. So it's anti-Christian. So the oldest piece of anything that we've found that survives going all the way back is an anti-Christian piece in which they're making fun of the Christian because he's worshiping Christ. So apparently they knew about Christ, and maybe there was images. Some people say the early Christian church didn't have the crucifix or the cross, that it's purposely not shown until later. It's just none of them survived. To say that is taking a big step, a leap of faith out there. But this is one of the earliest things we find. What we have found, though, we're fortunate that around the beginning of the 2nd century, so in the 100s, it became popular in Rome for the pagans to begin burying their dead. Normally, what did the pagans do with their dead? They would burn them. Father Nathan, would you run back and grab my water bottle, please? So they would burn them. But then it became the popular thing for the Romans to bury them. The trouble is, the cemeteries land is at a premium because Rome is priced and overbuilt. And so what you do is you go down. And so that's why these catacombs would be created there. And of course, you also have in these catacombs, not only the pagans there, you have 2 other groups of people that are going to be burying their dead. They're happy to have these catacombs there. The Jews, because you don't burn the body, you bury it. Why? Why you bury it? Because of the resurrection. We believe that the Pharisees that survived after, thank you, the Pharisees, the only group that survives after the sack or the destruction of Jerusalem. And so they still believe in the resurrection. And then the other group is who? The Christians. So when you go down to some of these catacombs, there may be pagan places, there may be some Jewish, but the Christians you can pretty well know because they put their signposts up everywhere. And so just to show you, so this is what they would look like, 62 feet deep in the deepest part. There's 60 total catacombs in Rome, separate catacombs, miles and miles and miles. In fact, most of them you can't get into. They're locked down. People could have gotten lost. And, yeah, that'd be a sad thing to get lost in the catacombs, okay? All right. But when Christianity became legal, this up until that point, this was a common place where a lot of the Christians would go and worship and do some of their liturgies. Why would they have to do that? Because of the persecutions, the Roman persecution, right? And so as a result, they were quite popular, and a lot of their saints were buried there. Then when Constantine becomes emperor, and he no longer, he stops the persecution of the church, and he actually helps support the church and builds these big, massive basilicas. Then they take some of those relics out of the catacombs, and people are no longer going to the catacombs to visit the saints there, right? They're then, instead, they're going to the big cathedrals that are being built. In fact, St. Peter's, Constantine built, he plows into the hill that had a cemetery where St. Peter was buried, where his shrine had been erected in the 1st century. Okay, the second and third generation Christians had built a shrine to St. Peter, and they found it in World War II, the Scalia, the excavations that they did secretly under that, and found right under Constantine's altar, right under Bernini's altar. So the church knows what it's doing, okay? And so, well, what happened is when people were no longer going to the catacombs, they don't need to, because they can go in the basilicas and pray, and all the saints have been taken up there in the basilicas, then what happens is people don't go down there anymore. They're sealed. They forget about them. They won't find them until the 6th century, and then the 20th century they found some more. It doesn't mean that they found everything, probably have. But this is the one called the Crypt of the 16 Popes, in which there's Crypta dei Papi, of the ones that are entombed here. This is the loculi, where they would have been buried intact. And of course, all around all of these various places, there's all sorts of symbols that the Christians would have given, saying, this is where the Christians meet. And of course, this one we all know because some of this you've seen before. What is this? And the 5 loaves, which talks about what? The feeding of the 5,000. But also it has a symbolic meaning that the Eucharist could be celebrated there. Now, if a Roman soldier is going through, they're going to have no idea what that means. The Jews that are, I hate to say this, forgive me, the Jews were sometimes the ones who were ratting out the Christians as to what's happened with them. The Jews didn't like the Christians. There's that conflict. And for the first 3 centuries, it's the Jews that are ratting out the Christians. Unfortunately, they kicked them out of the synagogues. They didn't like what they were saying because what they were saying, they didn't believe in Christ. And so that's why, anyway, yeah.
Father, is there any connection between that symbol and what we come to know as the Iconography?
Yes, I'll show you. Yeah, and this is real important. So this is one of the chapel spaces here. You're going to see this is late 4th century though. This is the Catacomb Commedia, and here you can see the icon of Christ here. We're going to come back to this because this is a little bit later. But you see something here going on. So there's a lot of stuff that's there. Because this art was abandoned for all these hundreds and hundreds of years, it was preserved really well intact. In all these other places, in Alexandria and other places where they had stuff, there's been wars, there's been earthquakes, there's been flood, the city subsided into the ocean. We've lost so much. We just happen to have a treasure trove of some early Christian art that was buried here. And by the way, this is some of the stuff that actually pointed me towards the Orthodox Church itself too. So you do have some of the symbolisms that are there. This is a later one though. This is the Christogram, right, 4th century. We see it right here, carved into our iconostasis. We see it back there. You see it all over the place. This is what they may have put on Constantine's shield, as well as the cross, in order to be able to be victorious. But here's some of the older stuff. Here's the stuff you're asking about. So this is a Timitus. This is his localized stone. This is his tomb is beyond here. His remains are there. So this is what they would have put up in a memorial plaque for him to contain his body. And you see 3 Christian symbols could possibly be seen here. You see, what are the symbols? We have, and by the way, we have a lot of these put up here as well too, okay? What's this? Okay, it is a cross. It does have a cross, but what does it have down here? Anchor. It's an anchor. Okay? Christ is being our anchor. And so you have the motif that's there, but here what do you have? Why do you put a fish? It's like a fish on a person's tomb. That identifies him very clearly as being Christian. Because ichthus in Greek spells out Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, in the Greek as an acronym. Okay? So that's why the fish symbol will be so important. But later on, they get a little bit more bold. The persecutions are still taking place. This is the 200s. This is still before the time of Constantine. And so they'll have this as the tree of life out here, but we see something else beginning to appear. Yes, okay. Remember, these are surviving examples that we can look at today. I'm not talking about what was lost, any depictions of the face of Christ or the Virgin and Child, except for the ones we have in our holy monasteries of the Virgin and Child. So what we see here is the Good Shepherd here. And this is indication that this person was Christian. Now we do have, and this is 3rd century, so this is 200s, we do have something here that's this is Datus's loculi stone that covers his tomb. And it has the inscription that's here. But we have something that you can probably tell what this is if you look at it very carefully. Now, don't think about the Harry Potter thing, okay? All right, that was something to help. It's a tool to be able to draw your attention to something. All right, doesn't mean that this person was a wizard, okay? Because there's people who do weird things when they see this stuff, okay? And I'm not saying you will, okay? I'm just saying if you go on the internet, people say, oh, see Harry Potter. Okay, but look at this. This is 200s. What is this? And can you tell what this or who this is? That's Lazarus. That's Lazarus. And what's happening here? Who's this? That's Jesus. And we know it's Jesus because guess what? They've already given him the halo, showing that he's divine. So they're already applying, these are the Christians who were, this is before the canonization of the New Testament, and the Christians have already adopted this motif to try to show that this person is God. Now, they don't show him as being bearded, but this is also in Rome. How much is that image from the East that is prevalent in all the places in the East have prevailed there? That's a good question, but clearly the resurrection of Lazarus, okay? Here's another one that comes, it's around the same time. You can see it's the same thing. He's got the same pointing stick towards Lazarus to come forth. But if you know something about Jesus, how is he being depicted here? He's a Roman. He's shown very much Roman. Jesus would not have looked like this because he's wearing this type of thing is something also the high-class Romans wore. That wouldn't have been, he wouldn't have had that stature in the Roman society. Okay? And so, but there, once again, some of the people painting these are not necessarily Christians. They're artisans hired by the Christians to come in to paint. And so they're painting what they know from their culture, and so it's being described to them what to paint. Perhaps we don't know. See, we don't have any of the records of this. We're looking at this trying to do an understanding without any of the records that go along with it. Here's another one from the Catacomb of Callistus. You see the same motif. So this is all over the place. Why would this be an important thing to put in the catacombs for the Christians when they're doing it? Look, yes, you bring your loved one down here. Maybe they've been martyred for the faith because they believe Christ is going to come and raise them. So the importance of that's why, right? It's real important for us to this day. So we're in imitation to what they were doing way back in the second and third century here, okay? Here's another loculi, a tomb cover. This one has a person, can you tell me what anybody's doing here? They're praying. This is Iran's position of prayer. They're praying, and you have this. Could be the Holy Spirit, yes. Could be the Holy Spirit. Could also be what other story? Not the Phoenix. Noah. Remember with the olive thing here. And what do we have here? The hero, Christos symbol that's put there. So this plaque on there, they wouldn't have to say anything more than that. It doesn't say anything else on there. It just shows that person's a Christian. For anyone going by would know that person as being a Christian. This one is like, you guys saw this when we did the other one on the Nativity. This is the oldest one of Theophany we find in 250 AD, which showing, here you don't see you don't see the halos that are put in there, but you can see one of the oldest ones of, so it's even some of these scenes are going back of depicting some of the biblical scenes. One of the earliest things that we do find in the catacombs is a motif that pops up the earliest of Christ, other than these I've shown you, is Christ as the Good Shepherd. And why would they be depicting Christ as the Good Shepherd? Because he says, yes, right? I am the Good Shepherd, right? And my sheep know my voice. Right? He talks about himself of being that and about the people who are following him. And so this is a motif. And so this whole muscophoros, which literally means, I think, calf bearer. It doesn't mean sheep bearer. It means calf bearer. So this goes way back in the classical tradition, but it gets changed by the Christians. The Christians change it. There's a pagan motif that we can tell different if it's a pagan tomb or if it's a Christian tomb, because they change it. Let me show what they do. So, and this is Orpheus, and Orpheus is a pagan character, and he's trying to woo the animals, the wild animals, with his instrument by playing the lyre and the various instrument that he's got here. We can tell also because he has this cap on. Orpheus is always shown with that cap. He also shown with a lyre or with an instrument. So that's in Domitilla, a catacomb where we have some Christian remains there. I think I told you when I went in there, the first time I went in there, I thought, I want to bring back some sort of relics, so I'm going in there, and while they're not looking, I had a little Ziploc baggie, and I go in there grabbing one of the tombs, I'm grabbing out some of the dirt and putting into my pocket to put in the thing because I hope I got some relics of the martyrs or something that's there. I come to find out I was in the pagan tombs. I still have the dirt, so when I go back there, I'm going to put it back. I feel bad about that. It's my confession. Okay. This is Orpheus. Once again, Orpheus. We know it's Orpheus because what does he have? He has this might be the pan flute. He has either the pan flute or he has the lyre, of course, and the animals that are here. All right, this is another one of Orpheus. We can tell because of the animals and the hat that he has, but here it gets changed. This is one of the oldest. This is not the oldest, sorry. This is the Catechism of St. Peter Marcellinus in Rome, and from the 4th century, we see the life of Jonah, and you go into the catacombs, you'll see also a lot of depictions of the life of Jonah all over the place. Why would they have Jonah all over the place? They have here's being thrown into the belly of the well, or into the mouth of the well. This one's coming out of the mouth of the well. Jonah's underneath the vine. This one fell off. Because the whole story, what are we doing Great and Holy Saturday? We read the whole story of Jonah, right? Because it's all pointing to the resurrection, okay? And so Christ is shown in the Good Shepherd here. He no longer, and he has there, but there's not holding any instruments. It's kind of hard to be able to see this one. This one is one of the oldest ones. This is very old from what they've been able to date it. This is 2nd century, so we're talking about the 100s. So this is around the time that they began occupying the catacombs. So this is about the first time they started the catacombs in Rome. Christians are coming in and creating this motif of Christ. It's hard to see him, but you see that the relationship between the Lamb is very, very close. Okay? This one's a little bit easier to see. It's one of the few ones I've seen where the lambs actually have horns. Some lambs have, it's not just goats. But anyway, the Catacombs of Priscilla and 225, which we see here, Christ is now shown, we believe, is the Good Shepherd. He doesn't have the halo aspect. This is probably one of my favorite ones. This is 250. This they thought was, by the way, the oldest depiction of Christ. Now we've come across more stuff since I was at UCLA doing art history. This was the oldest one we used to have. It's not so much anymore because we have found a few more. So we see Christ showing as the Good Shepherd here, but guess what? He's shown once again almost in that still that hieratic form. Have you guys been around sheep? Sheep are not small necessarily. Here, this is a good proportion size, but you see the ones here are pretty dinky. So there's the hieratic one, and of course in the catacombs there's multiple statues of Christ as the Good Shepherd that have been preserved. That comes out of this. This is what's really cool. This comes from the mid-3rd century. It's from Durus Europa. Durus Europa is a house church that exists in Syria. It's one of the few house churches that survived simply because they were going to be invaded by the Persians, and it was an outpost, a Syrian outpost, and they actually told the Christians they had to move out of their church, and the Jews who were at the synagogue had to move out of their synagogue because they were both next to the city walls, and they filled those buildings in with rubble to make an extra wall. Didn't save them from the Persians. They still fell. But what happened is this synagogue and this church got preserved. The synagogue got preserved way better and blew art historians' minds out of the water because we say the Jews don't use pictorial art. It's filled floor to ceiling with scenes from the Old Testament. You know, yeah. And this one's showing the miracle. Can you tell what miracle it's having? Yeah. See, you guys know your story. See, Max Eimer would be very happy. This comes, by the way, from this is the Jewish synagogue, floor to ceiling. And does anyone have an idea who this might be? If you see the same kind of wand things going on here, it's not Hogwarts. This is not, Slytherin. Yeah, excellent. Very good. See, you guys, so great. So this is the soldiers, the Egyptian soldiers coming. These are the Jewish people. This is supposed to be the Red Sea. And guess what? There is a motif. They don't show God the Father at all, but they will give a little hint of him in the hand. The hand is usually down. It's not meant he's going like this. In this one, he's acting in terms of to keep them at bay. This one, he's trying to keep them to be able to. And Moses is his servant. But notice how Moses is depicted. This is in Syria, by the way. The very edge of the Roman Empire. How's he depicted? and with a Roman type of toga, which belonged, once again, this to the upper class. Moses would have never been dressed in this. They didn't know any better. Okay? They didn't know any better. That's the contemporary of how they would depict people at the time. But the fact that they had this, if you look at some of the surviving Christian art from the catacombs, you know, there's amazing similarity. And this one is one of the ones that is in the, this was based on the Dura Europa church. This is one of the few motifs that survived in the baptistry portion of that church. The church was pretty badly devastated. ISIS got a hold of that area, and I still don't know what happened. If the church survived, I mean, they took a lot of the frescoes off the wall and took them into the museum in Damascus. All that whole synagogue is now in the museum in Damascus, so it's preserved. If it would have been left there, it could have been destroyed. But you can tell what this is?
We believe it's going to
Right, very good. Right, and of course, why is that an important motif that they're going to have over and over and over again? We see it in the catacombs everywhere. Okay, yes, to know that they're Christian, but why is it, okay, but by the way, every single orthros during the ode, one of the canons, two of the odes of our canon we sing, always talk about the three youths in the fiery furnace. Yeah, once again. And also the fact that in the midst of persecution, God's going to be with you in the minute. He's going to get you through whether you live or not. The key thing is that you continue in Him to live eternally. All right? And so that's why that motif is very, very strong with the early Christians, because they're under the gun and persecuted at the time. Okay? Well, some people would look at that and say that that's possibly, I mean, like the three strangers in and unaware that you have here is definitely one the church has seen. It could be also something that's a prototype pointing to that. This one is kind of easy to tell. Noah, right? Oh, I already spelled it out for you. Sorry about that. Okay, this one also is a motif that's trying to show, who is it trying to show? Moses, excellent, Moses, because he's taking off his shoes, his sandals, because he's before the burning bush, which is kind of hard to see. It's a holy place. And then, of course, he's striking the rock to be able to have water come out of it. Okay, and this is another one which we saw, which they're throwing Jonah into the thing. And this one you can tell, this one we do every liturgy. Say who? Well, it could be Veronica, but this is the Samaritan. Yeah, this is the Samaritan woman, right? The woman who comes and touches the hem of Jesus's garment. Not the Samaritan. The woman. Well, who touches the. It's not Saint Photini. This is the one who touches the hem of his garment in order to be healed. All right, which is part of the reason why we do that in the procession that's entering. But once again, Christ is shown as a young youth. Without a beard, he's shown in Roman. How well they had an artist that could be able to do that. Here's, though, where we start to see this image about how we understand Christ from the holy napkin starts to appear in the West. And this, whereas that image comes over a lot stronger, and here we see, this is a real bad fragment from the catacombs. We see Christ, but you can tell here he's got the big eyes like from the Coptic, those funerary portraits that's shown here. But he's also in a position where, like he's up there, the Pantocrator, he's holding the gospel. And if you can see with his hand, you can't see because it's lost, he's doing what? He's blessing, right? So that brings us here to the point that in the West, you're going to see, this is once again what has survived in iconography. We have, in the East, we have very little bit. Ravenna and Rome are huge jewels of preservation of early Christian and early Byzantine art. In the East, because of earthquakes and repeated wars and the Turkish conquest, there's been so much that's been destroyed, unfortunately. But this is one of the funerary chapels where they would have had people buried here, but you see one with this motif of Christ here, and we know that it's Christ because, how do we know it's Christ? The halo lets us know Alpha and Omega, right? They clearly identified. So that's why we have in our icons that. We'll have that. The one back there, if you see the one that Jan Isham did, it's brilliant. She has it both in Greek and in English, which I didn't notice it the very first time I saw it. But this one we see Christ. Now, there's some people who would say, and this I disagree with. and my own art history professor didn't necessarily say this, but there are people I've read stuff in which they say, well, that's because they're trying to show Jesus as the new Zeus. You're right. Yes. So they're trying to say Jesus is the new Zeus, and that's why they're doing it. It's like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because we already had this image that's been given to us repeated. It's just that some of this image is finally coming to the West because they don't have these images. It takes sometimes a while for them to get it. This is a little bit more the detail that's here. Notice the painting. It's not really, because you're in a catacomb, you're doing this, it's dark, you have to use a torch. You've got dead bodies all around you. You know, some of these people painted really quick brush strokes. You know, they're trying to get out of there maybe. They may not have been Christian just because they were done here. Now our icons, in order for them to be true icons, they have to be done by a person who's an Orthodox Christian who does it with prayer and fasting. All right? But for these people, you know, at this time, it may have been that's just person who's trying to depict it the fast they can. But this is one that's interesting. This was a new find. I never saw this before. Cemetery of Constantine Villa in Rome, early 4th century. And this is clearly Christ Pantocrator. So we're talking about, this is the 300s. This is before, this is right at the time of Constantine. And so we see this image that's clearly from what we know. And just some of this, you saw this from before when you were, if the Nativity one. This is the oldest one that we have of the Virgin Child that is copied except for St. Luke's icons that we have. This is the oldest one we have, and this is in the Catacomb of Priscilla. This goes to 150 AD. A prophet, Barlaam, who's talking about the Virgin Mary and the birth of the Christ child. And this is the detail here. If you get too close, you can't make it out, but she's nursing Christ right there. This is a later one that comes. You'll see this at the beginning of the 3rd century. You'll see this in one of the catacombs that's there, and you can see this is it's almost example to what we have up here. And in terms of the position, the hero that's shown, although she's shown as a woman she's like an empress, right? But there's something that shows that she's still a virgin. There's something that shows that she's still a virgin, the veil. The fact that they put the veil on, okay, that's what's real important. And then later on, you'll see later on, what develops in the Orthodox iconography is that Mary will be enclothed with the purple, but if they see, or the red on the outside, but on the inside, if you get to see inside, you didn't get to see this too much. Yeah, and that looks, but some of that's done, we're going to see, as a purpose for a hieratic purpose. Yeah, and that's also because she's looking here. Christ is looking a little bit askance. The two that are looking directly at you are who? They're not apostles in this case. They're St. Theodore and St. George. So the notion is that you ask them to intercede for Christ for you. The angels are already in communication with God, and we know that God's communicating with them because guess what we have here? Like, the hand. The hand. God gives us the hand, okay? So the hand is coming down. It's a motif of God's blessing upon that. But this is one of the old encaustic icons. This is a 5th century icon. This is what they had before the period of iconoclasm in the churches. We only have a handful of those that are survived because of the devastation of iconoclasm that took place. And thank God for St. Catherine's Monastery. And by the way, we have a parishioner here, Peter, help me. Peter Chang, who he has something on the website that helps to support St. Catherine's Monastery. They're really, they have a good relationship with the Bedouin Arabs that are there. They even have within St. Catherine's Monastery, they have their own little mosque that they have there for the Bedouins to be protected and go to worship because they're trying to help provide a space for them. Okay, they have a good relationship with them. Those Bedouins, when ISIS was coming after St. Catherine's and wanted to make a target, because as far as I know, ISIS may still be out there in the Sinai. What was happening is the Bedouins who helped and were the most effective to stand up and make sure nothing would happen to them. Yeah.
At USD, I found a book about St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, and a photographer went there and took photos of the monastery and all the icons there, and it's beautiful. And I'll bring it to church tomorrow if anyone wants to come by during Agape.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a real treasure trove. But like I say, the oldest form of the complete Bible we have comes from there. It's interesting that the oldest icons we have comes from there. That's because it's the oldest continually operating monastery that hasn't been. It was outside of the Byzantine Empire during the iconoclasm. So they didn't touch it, thank God. Right? Yes?
Question. It sounds like up to this time, the icons are colorful but not vivid and not so many colors in the icon. Like it's just gold and red.
It could be. But what ends up happening, I'm going to show you something. They end up, one change that does take place in the icons, and that is they're trying to also enrobe Christ and the Virgin with imperial dignity. The idea is that if it's good for the emperor, Jesus and his mother and the saints are even more important than the emperor. And so the notion is, so that's why you have Mary. What is she wearing there? What color is she wearing? She's wearing purple. Only the emperors wear purple. Okay, now by the way, this is one of my favorite icons of the Virgin Mary. It comes from St. Sophia's. I'll show you a little bit. We're going to end up with this here. What time do we have right now, by the way? 16:29. That's what? Okay, good. All right, thank you. You scared me for a little bit. 16. How am I supposed to interpret that? Said by good military fashion. So, but if you could see that she has blue on underneath here, and she has the purple or the red on the outside. The blue stands for what color? And you see it in our icons here. Mary has a blue on underneath, which signifies that she is human, and that by the red that she has or the purple she puts on, which are our imperial colors, that she's put on divinity, royalty, but also divinity. Because remember, the royalty gives us, that's the symbol of also showing the divinity. And so, but Christ is just reversed. If you see in his icon, which I know this is blocking here, his icon would have him being either, right? He either has usually the red on or the purple on, and then he has a blue mantle on. He's taken on humanity. So the colors are used for purpose. Sometimes you might see a few artists that mix, iconographers that mix it up, but generally they don't try to. This is, anyway, you'll get to see this a little bit more. One of the most, but see, we see that the mouth is very small. The nose is exaggerated, the eyes are very big, but this is, to me, one of the most beautiful, compassionate. This is done right before the fall of the Byzantine Empire. They're still producing some artwork of this quality, which is, to me, one of my favorite pieces. But this one here, as we talked about, is the encaustic icon from St. Catherine's Monastery, oldest surviving panel icon. And this was done thus after the Third Ecumenical Council. All right, so this is done after Chalcedon, in which they're trying to argue how is Christ fully God and fully man. And so this is way before we get to the Seventh Ecumenical Council. But at this council, when they're trying to argue, they're trying to say, they're trying to show, if we're going to depict Christ, we need to show him as also not only his humanity, we have to show his divinity, right? And so this is a very important one. I want to show you a little bit in terms of what they do here. This is if you take one side of it and duplicate it. If you take the left side and duplicate it, if you take the right side and duplicate it. And some people think, and by the way, this icon was created, Raphael, you get a kick out of this stuff here. This icon was created in the studio in Constantinople. So it's right after we've had these councils in which they're trying to come to a way, how do we show Christ as being fully God as well as fully man? And so one of the ways of doing this is to show, here's his divinity, here's his humanity by an exaggeration. This looks like the I am coming for you, Jesus. And this is the one, God loves you and so do I, Jesus, okay? So you have the humanity and the divinity shown in one. Now that's, by the way, we're looking at this from 1,500 years later and thinking that's what the person meant when they did this. No, none of this is written down. We don't know. We're trying to understand it. But it does seem that these icons were the ones that were causing some of the scandal during the Byzantine Empire that caused, because there were people doing some stupid things with these icons. I mean, it was really stupid things. Some people, they believe that there were some wonder-working icons, and we do believe there's wonder-working icons. It's because God is manifesting his presence to the people at the time when they process them out when they're being under attack. Or people come and they pray to God and there's healings are done, so people go and they would take and maybe make an offering there at the monastery. And some people would argue the reason why the Byzantine emperor switched to going against the icons was because the Byzantine Empire is shrinking. They have a lot of expenses to keep the army against the invading hordes on the outside of the empire, and yet all this money is going to the monasteries, which is basically tax exempt, because it has these wonder-working icons as well as these relics. And so one way of getting the people to stop going and giving all these donations there, this is what some art historians have said. I mean, it's hard for us to go back and say exactly. We have a lot of stuff that's written. They were pulling out everything they could to argue against the icons. But some of the people in their foolishness did some stupid things. And one of the stupid things they would do is the priest would say this is a special icon, wonder-working icon, and so he'd take the icon and he'd shave. We have this because these are the primary sources that mention this. And he'd shave part of the paint and that into the chalice for communion. Hello, that's a stupid thing to do. Why would you do that? Okay, you already have the body and blood of Christ. This is a wonderful thing to have the icon. Yes, thanks be to God. It's an addition, but you have the body of Christ. You don't need to add anything to it. We don't do that, right? The other thing people were doing, this is so special that they would put the communion here on the hand of Christ for people to come and, take it off. Okay, so this is why the emperor, listening to some of these things and some of these abuses, said no more icons and had them removed. So that when there's this over 100-year battle on whether we have icons or not, and the church says yes, of course, because of the incarnation we can. We talked about that in the previous lecture, why we can't have icons, the theology and the reason for it. So when the church restored the icons, they realized there's a proper way that they are to be venerated. We venerate them, but we don't worship them, okay? We only worship God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But they could be venerated like we venerate one another when we greet one another, like we venerate the cross, like we venerate the gospel. But if they're going to be depicted, they have to be depicted to show Christ and the saints, Christ fully God and fully human. They have to show those. And the solution to that is that hierarchic style in which Jesus' mouth shrinks, so he's like those portraits there, the funerary portraits. The eyes are bigger to show his divinity, his authority, his power that's there. And Christ is also dispassionate. All of the icons, they showed, even if there's a terrible crucifixion scene, he isn't shown in screaming agony. It's just not shown because we're called to be dispassionate. It doesn't mean that he wasn't terribly abused. We have that from the Shroud of Turin, the evidence of the proof of that. Yes, go ahead.
In all of icons of Christ the Pantocrator, what is the significance of the book? Like, is it white? And in that one specifically, the cross and the symbols around it.
Some people can say it's the Pantocrator. It could be the book that you open up of those who are listed in the book or not listed in the book. Okay, but a lot of times that the book is shown open and we could read the passages that are inscribed. It has multiple meanings. Usually it's the scriptures because he is the Word of God incarnate, and we have the record of Revelation, which we call the Word, the scriptures, but he is the Word. And so we venerate the Word, the Bible, but we only worship the living Word. Yeah, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Follow-up question on that. Above, behind you, just above the altar, is that the second coming?
No, actually, that's a good one. Thank you. You could think that. No, this is more the one of the second coming, because he's coming in glory with the angels, as it says. This one, because it looks like it's coming in glory, but it's actually meant to be the ascension. Meant to be the ascension, yeah. But you could, because he's coming with the angels as well, too, right? Okay. I never thought about that. I'll have to ask Dimitri. Is it meant to be a double meaning? Does anyone know who this could be? Yeah, who said that? Yes, Daniel, excellent. Okay. Now, in this case, it's not marked, but here's why I'm talking about portraiture. If we can recognize Christ, we can recognize the Virgin Mary. Shouldn't we be able to recognize the apostles, right? And that's why I just want to show you some of these real quickly. This is one showing Christ and the apostles in the catacomb of Comedilla in the late 4th century. So we see Christ. Finally, in the West, they have more which matches the iconography we got from the Holy Napkin here. It's shown, clearly it's Christ because it has Alpha and Omega. We have the halo. And who is this and who is this? Okay, which is which? Ah, why? Because he's always shown a little bit more balding on the top. and he's shown with a full head of curly hair with the white beard. This motif is, let me show you how old this motif is. All right, this is the 100s. This is on a tomb carving of a child, in which they're asking for Peter and Paul basically to pray for that child in Rome. We have the prayers of the saints being invoked on the very tomb of their child that they're turning over to God, and the hero that's there. But if you see that, we can, now of course they've marked it, Petros, Pavlos, you can see it there.
So just they didn't have the names of the deceased on the show.
Not on this one. Not on this one, yeah. Isn't that interesting? So this is, and so what happens when you get to, this is one of those surviving encaustic icons. Some people say 5th century, some say as late as the 7th century, but this is based off of the one I showed you, the Virgin Child with the 2 saints and the 2 angels, and Christ Sinai. This is the same encaustic style with the hot wax technique. But when, after 100 years, people haven't been able to legally produce these icons, when they come back into doing them anymore, they don't know how to do the lost wax technique. That's why it's lost, okay? So they haven't been able to do the encaustic technique. And so that's what they end up doing. Instead of doing wax mixed with pigment, they do something that's a little bit more lasting, although the wax handles well if you're in the desert in Egypt. But other places it doesn't work very well. And that's why Sinai is preserved. It's so dry there. In other parts of the world, it may not survive so well. But what the Christians will begin using is something that's very durable. You know, because if you make breakfast and you don't clean up afterwards, you pay the price for it. They started adding what to the pigments? Egg. And so the egg tempera is what's now used by most of the iconographers to do the panel icons here. But here's one thing I just wanted to show you real quickly. After the time of when Constantine becomes Christian and he starts building these big monumental churches, and the church is out of the catacombs, then the motifs, this is still, what motif is this still? Christ is what? The Good Shepherd. It doesn't have anything to denote. A lot of times they'll have a nimbus halo, which means they'll have the cross behind him. Here they show him, but they show him, how do they show him here?
As a shepherd, not like a Roman.
Well, he is shown as but he's actually shown as something more than a shepherd. What kind of tunic is this? Guys, this is made out of what? Gold. All right, who would wear a gold thing that's lined with purple? The emperor. He's shown as the emperor, once again. So here's where you see some of the imperial garments that are placed on Christ that Christ, of course, never wore. But the understanding is, and that's where we even have some of that as well to this point, we enrobe him in those things because that was the thing that showed the highness of his power, the vastness of his authority going beyond that of the emperor. And here you see he's still a connection, but it's not quite the same. He's holding the cross more as a, yeah.
Is he feeding that sheep?
It looks like he's touching. It looks like he's touching them. It may be that he's feeding. It could be. But this is in the tomb of Galla Placidia in Ravenna. If you're going to ever go to Italy, go to Ravenna. You got to see the best examples of early Christian, early antique Orthodox mosaics that are there. Really incredible. This is the Church of San Vitale, built by St. Justinian as part of his Byzantine Exarchate in the middle of the 6th century. This you can see what the church looks like. It's a domed building. So it's one of the first ones in the West that has a dome like this since the Pantheon. Okay? And if you see here, this whole part of the apse is completely covered with mosaics, not the rest of it necessarily. Right, because they put a lot of it in, because this is expensive to do. This is really expensive, but it lasts unless you have an earthquake that's really bad. And notice you see something happening. Christ is also shown here in the West. A lot of times he'll show, but we have icons of Christ in the East that show Christ as, beardless. Yes, beardless, as a youth. So it's not something that we don't have within our own tradition. We do. But here they show him there, but he's enthroned once again like the emperor. Okay, very good. And he's handling, what is he handing here to this person here? The halo. Yeah, it is, but it's actually a crown. It's a martyr's crown, the Saint Vitale. And the one who is giving it is the bishop here. Is the one who built the church. Okay, and here you see a little bit of more of the detail of Christ here in glory, but still, once again, it's a hieratic pose. Look, Jesus is as tall as almost the angels, but he's seated. He's clearly a bigger, monumental feature. The eyes are very, very wide. Okay, so, and then here you can see that's in the better detail that they've done here. This one, if you see, here's another one in the Archbishop's Chapel, which shows, and if you look here carefully, you can see who's on either side here. As we get closer, you can see who's that and who's that. Paul and Peter, very good, very close to Christ. He's showed it as a youth, in this case here. But this is what's interesting. Santa Pudenziana, if you're ever in Rome, this is a really neat church to go visit. It actually begun in the 380s. We know this. We can, the documentation on it's very clear. There was a second century house church that existed there from before. Pope Pius around 140 built it, and he built it along with an existing bath that was there. If you go to Rome, if you ever go to Rome, let me know. I'm going to tell you places you got to go visit. You won't. Everyone goes to the big tourist spots, and you miss some incredible gems. If you want to know what Rome, besides the Pantheon, what Rome looked like in the old buildings, there is a church right off of Station Termini that's part of an old Roman baths, where almost they didn't go in to strip all the pillars and the stonework off the walls. It's all kept intact because they used it as a church. And yet you can get an idea, a little glimpse of what Rome used to look like, and it's like incredible. What's that? No, San Pudenziana. That one is at St. Mary's. It's right to the right as you get up to Station Termini. I can tell you. Ask me, and I'll let you know where that is. It's hard to find because most people won't even think it's there. Okay, so this became the official church of the Pope of Rome until 313, when Emperor Constantine gave the Lateran Palace over to the Pope, and that became the Pope's official residence. The Vatican is not the Pope's official church. The Vatican is a very important pilgrimage place because of the relics of St. Peter, chief of the apostles. The Pope's actual official church is St. John in Lateran. But this was his church from before. And what's interesting, you can see a little bit, these are part of the baths. This is part of the structure from the baths that remained, that he was able to build into for his church, so we'd be able to preserve it. But this is what's fun. This is the mosaic that's here. Now, a lot of the mosaic has been lost. This remained here, this remained here, but some of this, well, not a lot, some got damaged here, and you'll see that because what happens is they did a lot of repair in the 16th century, and you can see the difference. This is more modern style, so this was all stuff they put in the 16th century. Here's where some of the older part was that they reworked. But what's really incredible about this one, and remember, this is going back to this is at the end of the 3rd century, so this is the 400s. So you see them having, I like this one. Christ is not only a beard, but Jesus is smiling. This is the only smiling Jesus I've found in all of my research. Okay, yeah, but they don't have Jesus smiling too much here. But I really like this one. This is kind of fun. This is Roman. This is the Roman style that's here. By the way, in that church, that's the only thing that's preserved. All the rest of the mosaics, all the other decoration, it was lost, except for that one. Here's one in Ravenna, where Ravenna has the ones with the beardless Jesus. When they had damage to those mosaics and they restored it in the 9th century, they put, between Peter and Paul, they put the more updated Jesus of being like we know him in the icons in the East. Here's the Arian Cathedral. This was built in 504 by King Theodoric, who was Arian. When Justinian took over this from them, he had it reconsecrated in 561. It has a procession of the females towards the Virgin and Child down here, flanked by 2 sets of angels. There's a procession of the male martyrs going down here to Christ. I'll show you that in just a second. Right, this got bombed heavily during World War II, and they lost everything in the Alps, so we lost that. But as you can see, the beautiful basilica design. This is basilica, but their windows are way up there, a 2nd story. We're a little short and squat. So these are some of the mosaics. I mean, they're not they put the best talented workers worked on Jesus and Mary. The less ones kind of got there, so their eyes are a little all over the place. But anyway, It's still pretty nice. This is the dais. This is the one, the icon of Christ, and this is what's really cool about this. It shows, even though he's almost the same height as the angels, but he's seated. It's this hieratic form. Once again, and we'll zoom in a little bit more. So this is the format you're going to see that gets frozen into place in terms of how we depict Christ for the up until we get, unfortunately, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great in Russia will change things, and that will seep into the rest of the Orthodox churches. And you have some very westernized iconography that comes in the church, if you can even call it iconography. It's beautiful Western painting stuff in some of the churches, the cathedral in L.A., the St. Sophia's Cathedral L.A., the Serbian Cathedral L.A., very, very, very Western. But any of the new churches that are being built, the Metropolitan, all of our bishops only want the traditional style that Photius Contoglou helped reintroduce back to the Orthodox Church after 1945, after World War I. And that's why the Greeks want to canonize him, recognize him as a saint, because he helped us realize this is the spiritual form, because it shows Christ as fully God and fully man. It also shows the saints being sanctified. And so what's really nice in this one here, you see the details, you get closer. I did this, there's this detail of whatever he's holding here, we don't know what it is, we can't figure this out. Remember, this was done by the Arians. This wasn't done by the Orthodox, this was done by the Arians. But they copy so much. I mean, their services were very similar to what we did as the Orthodox. And so, and what happens is at one point in some of these churches, they ended up removing some of the Arian bishops that were there in the mosaics, and they put curtains in place of where they were. You can see their hands are outstretched like this to the pillars, and there's curtains in the middle, because it's like, nah, he's not going to be in the church anymore. But you can see in terms of this style of Christ, in terms of the bearded Christ, but once again the prototype based on the holy face of Christ that's been preserved, but with the hieratic stylistic elements of the larger eyes, the smaller lips that are there. And that just brings us to the biggest enclosed space in the world for 1,000 years was Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. It was our flagship church. That's one of the best views of that. If you go into the place, and have any of you been there? It's just phenomenal. If you get a chance, go, because there's a major earthquake that's due to hit. I bet this survives, and I bet most of Istanbul goes down. But that's because this was so well built. But if you go into this church, unfortunately now they've turned it back into a mosque, and the rest of the Christian world sat on their hands and didn't do anything. Rather than being a museum, they've turned it back on the mosque, and so they've actually uncovered the faces, the beautiful faces. These are all mosaic of the seraphim that are here, cherubim and seraphim that are up here. There's a big one of Christ that's been either replaced or either gouged out, and they put that inscriptions, Arabic inscriptions from the Quran there. But there would have been, that whole thing would have been what we have up here. And here's the Virgin and Child, but this is so massive of a church. You can't see, and there's these two beautiful angels on either side of this apse wall. Those were the first icons put back in Hagia Sophia after iconoclasm. And you see the beautiful style that they've done it. But what I'm going to show you is mosaics that are in this gallery here. This is the South Gallery upstairs, which to me are my favorite icons. And they were done right before the fall of Constantinople, right after the sack of Constantinople by the Latins, and not too close to the fall. So you can still, even though the empire was hurting and been shrunk to basically almost being just a head, yet they could produce some of this stuff. This is what you can go find now. Unfortunately, when they have services, they cover these up now, especially the ones that are out in the main part. They have some big sheets, must look atrocious, that they lower for when they come in and do their prayers so that people can't see them. One thing I didn't know until I was doing this research for you guys was that when this church was taken over by the conqueror, the second one he took it over, it was the Sultan's private church. They didn't have a lot of stuff going on there. He used it as he turned it into a mosque, but it was his own mosque. You could go in there only with his permission. And the icons were left up. They were left up for centuries. They weren't covered up. It only was later on that some of the fanatics wanted them covered up. But so, Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. You can see why you convert. I didn't know whether I was in heaven or earth. Oh, because they're doing the liturgy, and the liturgy was so beautiful. But the space really helped in the sound. This thing, the Capella Romana has done a recording based on the sound acoustics of this, because they popped a balloon, and I don't know how to do it. People in technology, you guys got it all figured out. And they made this recording that of what it would sound like if they were singing in Agnus Dei, because they're never allowing anyone to record stuff, not any Christian hymns there. And so, yeah, you could see why it would be. But this is an incredible building. Like for 1,000 years, nothing was bigger than this, okay? But you go up here, and here's the dais, and you'll see how tall this is, up here. And this is, of course, is a little bit better. You can see, look how high up it is here. All right? And so we have the dais of Christ. This is based off of this one here, okay? And you have who's here? John the Baptist in this case. Sometimes it's John the theologian, but this is John the Baptist. And who? Yeah, the Virgin Mary, which is, like I say, one of my favorite ones. And this is one of my favorite ones. All right, incredible depiction of Christ. You know what? No. Well, what I've been told by some people when we were visiting there, I don't know how true it is. You'd have to do some research. Is that when they would give tours, when they were given permission to go in there, before they covered these up. They did cover them up at one point, so you wouldn't be able to see them. But before that, they'd give them some of the people that allowed them to go in would give money if they could be able to take some of the mosaic with them. And so if everybody has a devotion to the Virgin Mary, so poor Mary, she almost gets complete. But I don't know how true that is. That's what I was told when we were there. But you can see how beautiful this is up there with the light coming in. This is all gold-backed mosaic. And once again, the picture, the lighting changes the whole view. This is not quite exactly, but you can see I've done it for you here, so you can see in terms of what it would look like here. You can see the faithfulness, even though we're talking about, this was done in, what did I tell you, 1291? What did I say that was done? 1261. 1261. So you're talking about this one, 550, this is 1261. And you look at the faithfulness between this there. And why would there be a faithfulness? Because we had Christ's image with us all this long with the Holy Napkin. And because we have the image of the Virgin Mary passed on by St. Luke, and I think this gives a testimony to what ends up happening for the preservation of this, because you even see almost the same kind of thing going on here, and they didn't have access to this icon necessarily. When they're doing this, their world is really a small bubble, but there was quite an amazing revival of learning in Constantinople right towards the end. And that's why we have the Renaissance. Because those people fleeing the city before the end and after the end, those who survived the terrible devastation, they went into the West to take the classical learning into the West. Some people would say it came through another way, but I disagree with that. Okay, and then, but so you see, that's once again the prototypes that we have before going back to the Holy Napkin of Christ. This shows what they did later on when they covered this up in terms of, and then finally it wasn't until, this is what the gallery looked like until they finally opened this up at the last part of the 1800s. When they finally went in, you can see some of the damage that had been done. This is the part here where the dais is, and you can see here where they've covered up with the plaster. They did some work to try to find out what was underneath there. They didn't realize when they did the exploratory work, they did a lot of damage to the mosaic of John the Baptist. But at least and notice this is the stonework that's here. The stone is all around the base that's here. And then you can see the work that they were doing here in terms of trying to bring and restore the icons, and see the size of the icons are really quite monumental. Okay, questions? I've thrown a lot at you. Yes.
About the Aryan icon.
Yes. Yes.
They have the same symbol for Christ's hand.
Yes.
Is that meant to signify that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but also to the natures of Christ? But the Aryans didn't fully believe in the nature.
Yeah, they did. I mean, no, they were seeing Christ as being mostly fully man. but he was divine but created at a later point. See, so they would borrow the Christian iconography from the Orthodox, but their understanding was, oh yeah, he was divine, but he's a created divinity from a later point. Other point was there was a time when the Word didn't exist. So they don't have a problem with him being divine. He's not just eternally. He's not co-eternal with the Father. He's not the same stuff as the Father. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's why they're sacraments. That's why they were immersed 3 times. They were baptized in the name of the Father, dunk, and the Son, dunk, and the Holy Spirit, dunk. They did the exorcisms and that over them as well too. Yes.
Can you repeat the story initially where you talked about the king as a Odessa and also the narrative?
Oh, Abgar.
Yeah, the first part.
Okay. And what time do we have here, guys?
It's all 5.
All right. So once again, going to the tradition we have. This was a lot of fun, by the way, doing this. Although, man, I got caught up. With the funerary portraits, there were so many. I didn't know what ones to pull out to show you. There's probably a better way to go and do this, to go back at the beginning.
You could just stay where we started.
There we go. Okay, so the understanding is King Abgar of Edessa is one writing letters that to Jesus, and these are the ones that Eusebius writes in his History of the Christianity. So you can look up that book on the Church Fathers, and in there he's describing these letters back and forth between King Abgar and Jesus in terms of inviting Christ to come and help rule. Because in there he's saying, I'm sorry, I should have brought the text. I didn't know if we'd have enough time to be able to read from it, but he ends up saying that he understood that his own people were not receiving him, and that he would be willing to share half of his kingdom, right? All right, which is kind of really amazing that he's the king and he's willing to share half of it. Of course, he's also now been afflicted with this terrible disease of leprosy, and he's heard that Christ can heal lepers because he's healed lepers. He's healed other people. I mean, the words of this get spread, and people are desperate. You know, as people trade, move around, they hear some of these stories. And so as a result, he sends his painter, Ananias, to be able to go and try to capture a rendering of it, but he can't capture because of the crowds that are there. And then I hear another part of the story is he's just not able to get Jesus' image down. And so what Christ does, knowing that he's frustrated, not able to give him what he needs, and knows what would be helpful in the healing for King Abgar, is he calls for a basin to wash his face and a towel that he wipes his face with, and then he gives it to Ananias, and Ananias takes it back. And when he goes back, and this is what the image, one of the types of the image that would have been there, when King Abgar unfolds it to be able to see the icon of Christ, that's when the leprosy begins to dissipate. So he begins to be healed from the leprosy. But Jesus, and this is what Eusebius has clearly written in his history of the church history, he ends up saying that Jesus promised he would send someone after he finished his work to King Abgar. And so after Pentecost, Thaddeus, who's one of the 70, does go to Edessa. He's there, preaches the gospel. He lays his hand on the king. The king is healed from leprosy. All right? You know, Jesus did this, the apostles did this. Why shouldn't, you know, I mean, it's one of the 70. Even though he's not one of the 12, he's one of the 70. And so because of that, the king of Edessa converts. And this is huge because it's a city-state. It's the first nation, so to speak, that converts. No, not Odessa, Edessa. The name now in Syria. It's in Turkey. It's in Turkey now. It was in Syria, but it's now in the border that Turkey controls. I don't know the name of it now. Actually, if you look it up real quickly, somebody could find it.
It's not the one on the way in the
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, no. Odessa is the one we call in the Crimea, not Crimea, in the Ukraine. Yeah. Yeah, that's Odessa, but Edessa. Yeah, this is the ancient Edessa. Yeah.
which is Syria.
Yes.
Which is in between Antioch
Well, if you're going up towards Nineveh, there'd be an ark, yes, but you could, yes, yeah. But it was an important city state, and like I said, it had, we know that it had the holy napkin, and we also believe it had this, what is now the Shroud of Turin. Yeah, 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 yeah. That was the first part of the thing that ended up showing it. That's so. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, thank you for putting up with this. I hope that helps with some of that. This isn't my own idea. This comes from what I studied at UCLA, but it's just interesting how God, I felt, used this. I threw in the stuff, my professor didn't throw in the stuff with the Sundarium or also the Shroud of Turin, but I thought with what stuff we found out, because there's the images that are there, check it out sometime. It's really interesting. I think that it warrants us taking a good look at it. Okay. All right, so let's stand and we'll thank you. I know some of you guys have traveled a long way back from Arizona today. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, our God is one. Lord, we're thankful that you have called us to be living icons. We're thankful that you are seeking to even have us more as holy living icons, but even as the very living tabernacles of you in your glory. May we be able to reflect that to one another and to all those around us. We ask this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Mary, for lending us your laptop. Thank you for